Well, good morning, everybody. See, we got one person waving their hand at the bottom. So one person followed instructions. So it is official Verizon time, or official Toby's wrist time is now 10:03. So we will get the proverbial road on the show and get started with our next training session, which is how to, or hopefully how to effectively complete a unit induction in the era of plague. So my name is Toby Hoy. I'm the Lodge Advisor from the SIPO Lodge number 377 in the Buckeye Council. And with me today is...
And I am Sean Fonstock. I am the Membership Advisor for the Ironon Lodge, and myself, along with Tim Carver, who is in this class, helped develop our lodge's virtual election process when it became necessary.
There you go. So Sean, do you want to kick us off on this one, since I kicked off the last one, about how to properly and effectively, and can you do a unit election in the era of plague?
I can. So I will start out by saying that I was not a big fan of this concept of doing virtual elections. I had a lot of reservations on whether the lodge could effectively conduct them and maintain the integrity of the election. So what I will say that our lodge used is we used a, I can't think of the platform, but it was a Zoom platform. Thank you, Joe. We utilized Zoom, and we set up Zoom meetings with each of the units. And then we also sat down and modified how we would normally do our elections and brought Google Forms into play. So we made a specific Google form for each unit that we were going to go to. So we would load each of the eligible candidates into the Google form, and we utilized that to be able to conduct the voting instead of the standard paper and pencil voting method. In addition to that, what we did was we challenged the youth when they decided that this was the route that they wanted to go to hold elections, to develop a PowerPoint slide to guide through the elections and keep people engaged, instead of just staring at a screen and looking at some, funny person sitting there, or just a little block on the screen with a letter signifying their name, right? So they broke down what they would normally give for an election speech and personalized it with the lodge by drawing in a lot of lodge pictures to frame out what the lodge would do, which was pretty impressive. And I think that we're going to have to look at incorporating, even when we do get to go back to regular elections, is how to keep this presentation going. So by use of the presentations, we walked each of the units through the election process, talked about the order of the era, what it was, how it could benefit the units, the council, and the individuals. And then we moved into voting. We actually stepped them through the Google form in which they were able to vote. Now, what we didn't do was present the Google form to anybody until it was time to vote. So what this helped us do was to ensure that only people at that event were able to vote, which would be the same as if you were at a unit election. Only those members present are able to vote. The only challenging piece that became with this was making sure the correct number of votes that came in matched the number of youth. So, for example, we had one election where one of the Scout siblings voted, and he was a Cub Scout, and it threw the numbers off. So we had to sit down and actually take a very hard look at the number of votes versus the number of people there, and then talk to them. And eventually the kid said, yeah, I voted, and I'm just a Cub Scout. So we were able to extract that vote. Short of that, honestly, the digital election almost worked better than in-person elections. And it is very hard for me to admit that, because I'm a very big fan of in-person elections. And if you can hear that siren behind me, I'm sorry, I'm not sure where it's coming from.
It's coming from that way.
That way.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe, hopefully that it's not like, we're not all going to die here in the next minute. So if we do, it's been nice. It's been real. It's been fun. So we don't have to worry about virtual elections if we're all to get hit by an incoming, I don't know, whatever. So
I think it's just a warning, like they're just doing a warning test.
No, well, that just takes all the fun out of it. Here, I got excited for it was like it was the October. What was going to come in the Apocalypse Bingo in October? So,
well, how would we get any more Arrowmen then if the world ended?
There you go, using logic. So, so I'll let you. Are you?
You can go ahead and how you did it, and then we could talk about some of the pros.
Okay, cool. So. I will tell you that I am actually a little in awe at this point of Erie Lenon, because our SIPO's unit election method was incredibly haphazard. Our election season runs from January 2nd until the hope and prayer is the May LEC is when all ballots and all election forms must be turned in. This year we were going to really enforce the May LEC deadline, which was whatever day it was in May, and not waiting until that unit's week of summer camp, and it's still end of July, and we're doing the election for them an hour before dinner on Wednesday at their campsite. So that was our plan for this year, and that obviously, along with everything else planned for 2020, went in the trash can on March 17th or whenever about the plague hit. So the first thing we did was I reached out to our youth leadership in each chapter and said, any election teams you have scheduled to go out to Troop 1, 2, 3 or Crew 4, 5, 6 or whatever, they're not going, right? We're going to put the pin in this until the 2 weeks, and then well, that obviously didn't happen. So we left it pretty much up to the unit to conduct their election if the unit was meeting virtually or not. A lot of our units chose to just stop meeting for a time period, and that was okay, right? If they were meeting virtually, we took it to heart, the concept of a scout is trustworthy. And if the unit leader said we did the election in accordance with the requirements and guidelines of it was done via secret ballot, there was no adult interference, for lack of a better term, yada, yada, blah, whatever, then we took that as good. So we passed a lot of the responsibility onto the unit, which honestly, it made our life really, really easy, right? And there were some units we reached out at the end because we had to put a cutoff on there at some point, and I think it was June 1st. It was our arbitrary date. That's going to be it for this cycle, right? Now we all know that the national committee has put out some information that if a unit still wants to have an election this fall, then they didn't have one in 2020, they can still do that. And yes, I would accept it, right? Just in the interest of giving as many people the opportunity to become part of the order as can be. So I would still accept their, bear with me 1 second here. I just clicked the wrong button. There we go. I have unclicked. So to accept their election form, but the biggest thing has been, like I said, making it up to the unit. And whether I know a lot of units did the Google form option, some of our units did Slido, right, to capture their election, and we actually used Slido as an app for our lodge elections this past week or week before last, and it actually worked really, really well. We found the technology, it speeds up the process. Nobody has to stand back there and count slips of paper and keep a tally sheet and try to read what chicken scratch was on this person's ballot form or whatnot. So the technology can work. The only challenge is if you have units that are in a more rural area or don't have reliable high-speed internet, then they can't meet virtually. So if they're not meeting virtually, they certainly can't do a virtual election. So another thought would be is to offer an actual paper ballot and mail it out to all the scouts in that unit and then let them mail it back. And yes, that would easily work. The question is will they actually mail it back by the required deadline to be able to timely record that election? And then what do you do when that one ballot comes the day after you called it? And did that sway the voting for, Johnny Scout or Janie Scout one way or the other? And I don't have a simple answer to that. My biggest suggestion for that would be is whatever it is that your lodge does or the unit does, is there needs to be an established policy. An established, this is the sheet, this is what we're going to do, what we're going to want to do, and then actually do that. Because as long as everybody was communicated with or to what the requirements, policy, procedure, process was, and then as long as it was actually followed, and we can document that we followed the policy, practice, process, procedure, then there's less room for somebody to complain when they didn't get their way later. The challenge is when you have no established policy, process, procedure, requirement, and then just do it haphazard, and it wasn't well communicated, that's when people, and honestly at that point, have a legitimate complaint. Because if that one person in the unit didn't get elected, or somebody got elected that somebody didn't feel should have, now do they have a potential leg to stand on? And the answer there is yes. So it's trying to do everything that we can do to prevent the problem before the problem happens. The technical term for that, by the way, for those that are interested, is poka-yoke. You poka-yoke the process, so you idiot-proof it. It's why you can't plug your USB stick in upside down. It will not fit. It's why you can't plug your dryer in upside down and burn your house down or blow yourself up. It will not fit. You have idiot-proofed the process. So, anybody on the call, if you've got questions, comments, go ahead and throw those in the chat box, and we'll catch those and see what you all have to say about unit elections in the era of plague. And while those are all being compiled and gathered up, then we'll go ahead and see how you all, those of us here live, look, there actually are real live people in our training session. So there's a few of us folks here that are down at Muskingum Valley Scout Reservation. So while we're waiting on the folks on the live stream to pop their questions or comments in the chat box, we'll go with the audience participation. So in the line in the script, it says right here, pause for audience participation. So audience.
So what kind of cost was involved with licensing Zoom?
So it's a good question. So Zoom is, depending on what license you get, can vary in cost. So there is a free version of Zoom. The downfall to the free version of Zoom is you're limited to, I believe it's 30 minutes of time. And typically in order to conduct an election and get it done, you're not going to meet that 30-minute criteria. So we were lucky enough that we had a lodge member who purchased a Zoom account for us, which I believe he paid $20 a month
For the year.
So there's a monthly fee, or he actually paid $100 for the year. And we also have Zoom accounts at our council level that we were told we could have access to conduct these. So if a lodge is going to be using a digital platform to conduct their LEC meetings or chapter meetings, a $100 investment on the lodge's behalf in order to conduct elections is not really an unreasonable fee, especially if you consider how many units you have. So in our case, we have, I believe it was 167 units, if I remember the sheet right. So that's less than $1 a unit if we serviced all of our units, not to include all the additional meetings that we did. So when we break that cost down, it was very cost effective for our lodge to execute that. Toby, what platform did you guys use?
We've used a hybrid of different events. I have with my employer, I have a GoToMeeting account. So we've used that for a lot of our events. And whether it's GoToMeeting or Zoom or WebEx or the Google Meet that we're using right now, or they all effectively do the same darn thing. So as long as as a side note, as long as we've met the youth protection requirements, where there is not a case where you have one adult and one youth on the call at any given time. So as long as you plan on having two adults that log in a little early, and log off a little late, then you're covered. But whatever platform you use, it doesn't really matter. Our council, Buckeye Council, they purchased their own Zoom account to do roundtables and things of that nature. So we've been piggybacking on that one just because it allows the breakout rooms or the waiting room. So when we did our lodge elections, the lodge officers that were not giving their speech at that given time, we threw them back out into the waiting room and then let them back in once everybody was done. So that was one feature that Zoom has that GoToMeeting, or at least I've not figured out how to make it work if it does have that functionality. So the cost, and as Sean mentioned, it's minimal when you look at what you're getting for the $100 or the $120 or the whatever it is that it is. So in order to be able to still facilitate something, it's a minimal amount of cost. So
looking at our chat, we had a couple of responses.
Oh yeah. So
Tim, I'll get back to yours. I want to touch on Tyler and Jake, the youth in the room first. So if I'm reading Tyler's correctly, Tyler, it looks like you guys conducted in-person elections done at Scout Camp once you guys were able to return to camp, but you did it with a bunch of COVID precautions in place. Am I reading that correct?
Yes, you are.
Okay. And did you think that worked out pretty well in comparison to somebody coming to your unit and doing it? Or is this
it worked out really well.
Okay. That's great to hear. Hopefully you take some stuff from this, and maybe if you guys have to look at a virtual platform next year, you can help inform your fellow lodge mates on some ways that it did work for other people. Jake also responded. Hang on, I'm catching up on yours. So, Jake, you were brand new elected.
Yes, my ordeal was at Beaumont at the summer induction.
Wonderful. Welcome to the order, by the way.
Thank you. I mean, I was supposed to join back in April, but the pandemic hit, and
yeah. So we had a bunch of people in our lodge that had that happen to them. I kind of wish you were on our last one about events. You could have given some real feedback about
as a participant in the event.
Talked about that.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that we were able to get your election done and you were able to come out and join us in August, and hopefully we see you at one of our events very, very soon.
Well, you'll see me in October.
You know, I'm just failing all over the place because I'm pretty sure I just registered you 2 days ago for that event, huh?
You exactly did.
Okay, well, I'm sorry about that, buddy. It's been a long weekend.
It has.
So, Mr. Culver, you had a couple comments that you wanted to make. You with me, Tim?
Do we need to unmute Tim?
I think Tim lost his connection by the three little bubbles.
No, we have lost Tim.
So when Tim comes back in, we'll let him talk. Tim was the election advisor for the Irlanon Lodge and actually executed a lot of the process with the youth over this last year for us.
There you go.
So he'll be a good resource.
And we have now lost him completely off the panel. He's off one. He's on the service project right now.
Here he is.
Hey, he's back.
Welcome back, Tim.
Like crabgrass.
Tim is back in town?
Oh, now I'm gonna have that stuck in my no, that was the boys are back in town.
That's right.
Who was that?
Tim, we were segueing into how you helped run the election process for the Irlanon Lodge over this last year, and you had some comments you want to make. Do you want to share with everybody? So as soon as I start segueing to him, he drops connection.
He drops connection again.
So we're not going to segue back to Tim anymore. Did anybody else conduct a virtual style election this year? Have any of your lodges started looking at potentially doing it? Or I guess the question is, what drove you guys to come to this training, and what more can we tell you to make you more successful if you need to go this route? Hey, and now we have Caleb Carver, Tim's son, who was our election chief for this year.
Didn't listen.
And Tim looks back.
Didn't listen.
Nope.
All right, can you hear me?
We can.
Would you like
Can you hear me? I was gonna give it to my dad if you can hear me, but I don't know if you guys can.
We can hear you now.
All right, go ahead.
All right. So comments in regards to the online version that Ariel and On did. You know, it wasn't a simple, you know, we just turned it over like flip a switch type of thing. It took a lot of planning. I applaud Sean and the youth for that. So originally our election cycle would have been February. Am I dropped?
No.
Would have been February to middle May. We didn't get started with the online process until mid-May, and then concluded it slightly into August. And towards that, we had a lot of units that did the online version of the election, but towards the end, when we got to July and first part of August, we also had units that had begun meeting in person again. So we also had to find a way to comply with their request to meeting online, which was a second challenge to try and do that. But we made a commitment to try and service the election for every unit that prior to pandemic had listed and requested a date or requested a date later on. Those are my biggest things. So it's definitely a big challenge to be able to accomplish all of that in a way that was unit driven. You know, the objective obviously is to perform the election to be able to get those new airmen into the lodge.
Cool. So I think I saw something else pop into the chat box here. So our lodge was maybe looking into it, but we decided to do it blendedly. So I'm unsure what blendedly is. Is that you did a hybrid version of Tyler, both a in person and virtual?
Yeah, that's what we did.
Okay. So I mean, and a lot of it comes down to we're all learning this, you know, regardless of what component of scouting it is, whether it's the Order of the Arrow or just a unit meeting or a den meeting on the Cub Scout level, at this point it's focusing on. And I know for those that were on the last training session on holding events in the era of plague, it's not focusing on what we can't do, but it's focusing on what we can do and finding ways to do something. Because at this point, the COVID is going to be with us for a little bit longer, right? Not getting into the political debate or whatnot, but we're going to be stuck with this for a good long while. How we got here at this point is irrelevant, but it's how do we live with it now? So in trying to find the good in things as opposed to finding the bad in things is looking for opportunities of what we can do. So as Tim and Caleb had mentioned a minute ago, is committing to, if a unit wants an election on the second Tuesday of March, how do we find a way to make Troop 123's election on the second Tuesday in March, whatever the scenario is? How do we make it happen, right? Are they meeting face to face? If so, can we send somebody, right? Do we need to pick somebody that's already inside that county? Hopefully, yes. Do we need to send someone local? Do we do it where if they're meeting local, let's say if the unit is meeting face to face, can we join in and do their election virtually if we have to? That might be a whole interesting challenge of, you know, there are cases where if you have, you know, 5 or 6 units that want an election on the same night, how many election teams do you have? And how close by are they? If it happens to be at, you know, the Catholic Church on this corner of Maple Street and Elm Street, and the Lutheran Church on the other corner of Maple Street and Elm Street, up there on the screen. So Maple Street, Elm Street, you get the idea. Then you can hit both of those with the same election team the same night. But when you have one election at Troop 123 that happens to be in this city over here, and you have Troop 456 that is 78 miles away over here, you're not going to hit them in the same night. So either we have to get more election teams on the ground, or we have to find other creative ways to be able to get those election needs served. But I like the idea that, you know, we put that the law that Erie Lenon did of where they put together, for lack of a better term, a best practices sheet of what they're going to do, right? This is how we're going to do it, and be able to then send that out to the unit leader and the SPL of Troop 123 and say, here's how we do it. What night would you like us to do this for you? So,
and I could be wrong, I might have missed a follow-on communication on this, but I believe digital elections were only approved through a certain endpoint.
no, I would want to double check
So
that.
I believe that digital elections national authorized them through September at the wait, but it might have been July or August. So we might be outside of that window right now. But I personally would not be surprised if they don't come back and say with the success of them, that lodges can keep using them. And as I said earlier in this call, I was not a fan when this initially came out, and I was very resistant to it. But now seeing how effective they were and how beneficial they were for not even just the teams, but the units, I think I would strongly push to continue utilizing this platform because it saved a lot of drive time. It enabled, if I was having a hard time finding a team, to go out to a unit on the far west side of our council. I could utilize a team from the far east side, and all it meant is they had to go sit at their desk, open their computer, and conduct the election, instead of getting in their car and driving 2.5 to 3 hours. And anybody that's had to try and coordinate elections will tell you the hardest thing about coordinating elections, if the individual units don't do them themselves, is to get a team to cover every election requested. So if you're talking a council that may have 170 units, that's potentially 170 election teams that need to go out. Now, it could be comprised of the same people, but you're asking a lot of your team to go out and facilitate this, and a lot of miles put on their car.
Exactly. And a lot of evenings away from home and family. So, or away from job, or away from school, or away from whatever else it is that everyone's got going on. So, another thing to potentially keep in mind is, you know, how do you police the eligibility of those that are on the ballot in the first place? Do we take the unit leader's word on their honor that Johnny or Janie Scout has completed their 15 nights of camping? I don't know how you don't. So, and making sure then, you know, with the paper ballot, it's a lot easier to make sure that, okay, I can count the number of people, I can count the number of butts and seats in the basement of the XYZ whatever facility, and then know that, okay, if I got 27 bodies in chairs, I should have 27 ballots, to make sure that we don't have any. I would hope beyond all hope that there would not be any electioneering or election rigging, or it's not Chicago in the 30s in the order of the arrow. And I guess at that point, I don't know that how do you account? I mean, that's just insane. But I would hope that there's not anything inappropriate that is done on a unit level. But at some point, you got to take it on faith, and a scout is trustworthy. And if they said they did it, then they did it. So, anybody else on the call have questions, comments, and/or snide remarks that they would like to pile in?
So the only thing I'd like to put out as a caveat before we get to that point is remember that each individual lodge has their own processes on the way that they do things. While some lodges may be comfortable with individual units doing their elections, some lodges are very strict in the fact that they want an election team to come out and do it. So as you're hearing different ideas, understand that each lodge does the same thing with a different process, and it's up to the individual lodge to determine that process. Right?
Yep.
So please just keep that in mind and don't go back and say, well, I heard Toby and Sean say that the unit could just conduct their election, and then that lodge says, well, that's not the way we do it. Please understand that lodges have their own processes in place, just like the length of time that they have their election season. National allows a lodge to dictate when their election season starts and ends. Some are longer than others, right? So you gotta remember as you sit in these that there are different methods to get the same thing done, driven by your lodge leadership.
There you go. Good point. And then also keep in mind, one other component of the election is the unit visitation that goes along with it and the camp promotion, of whether you're peddling your council's summer camp for the scouts at Troop 1, 2, 3 in our fictitious example to go to, or whatever camp they go to. And as 2021 rolls about and we see what our Apocalypse Bingo card has in store for us next, I'm going for Snow on Fire. That's what I want to see happen next. That's on my December bingo card, is flammable snow. Because it might happen. It's 2020. You never know. But what camps will actually be open in 2021? What will not? And then who knows what the status of the worlds and the plague and everything else is going to be. So in doing that camp promotion as well, of where at this point, wherever somebody goes, as long as they are spending a night in a tent, is a good night. Is better than a night stuck at home in your bed. So it's promoting that camping component of our service to our councils as well. So keep in mind, there's more than one reason to go out and visit with that Troop 1, 2, 3 once a year, is to do some camp promotion as well. So anybody else on the call have questions, comments, or concerns they'd like to voice? We've got a few minutes of time here. We've got about 9 minutes left in our session. So this is your opportunity. Share with the group.
So this is the point in the other trainings that you go to normally when it would be in person, where we just stare at you uncomfortably until somebody talks to us, right? So, and judging by his face, Tyler really enjoyed that whole snow on fire thing that you were talking about.
I mean, I'm trying to think of, is there a way I can actually make flammable snow? Just because I want to see if I can do it. And I bet you that I can find a way to catch that snow on fire. Won't be on fire very long.
You could put gas in one of those like frosty makers.
Don't get any smart ideas.
I think I made a mistake.
Yeah,
None of you should get any ideas.
The Book of No says you cannot do that. Yeah, so I guess, I mean, if the Book of No, also known as the Guide to Safe Scouting, says that I can't have my Thunderdome, then I guess I can't have flammable snow. So,
but we might see the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse.
Yes, and the 7th angel poured forth his bowl into the air. Yes, that's going to happen next. So, I don't know, but I mean, at this point,
don't forget about the 4 horsemen.
Yes, the 4 horsemen. Yes, and I behold a pale horse and a rider, and whose name on sat on him was.
Well, don't try like experimenting with it, because law enforcement will get involved like that.
Well, that's just a whole different level of unfortunate. Now you got to burst my whole bubble, Jake.
I'm sorry. I'm someone who really takes things seriously, but I speak my mind. It's just me. I'm a Libra. What can you do?
And that's not a bad thing. And apparently there's a reason why we get along, because so am I. But anyway, that being said, before this goes any further sideways than it already has, we're going to put a pin in that topic and plan ways to not blow up the world, because it's 2020 and the world may blow up on its own. We may not need to help it along. So if there are no other unit election-y type related comments, then I would say we can call this session done. And we're only 5 minutes now ahead of our planned allotted time. So thank you all for joining our little soiree here this morning, and hopefully we see you on the rest of the live stream at conclave.mp4. We'll see y'all later.
Thank you.